Hello, good evening, and welcome back to another episode of Minds on Guard, where we're learning how to guard our minds against all of the manipulative tactics that plague our daily lives here in the 21st century, specifically in the social media landscape and all of the outcropping areas of life where our more rational thinking capacities can come under attack from those that wish to control us and direct our lives in ways that we may not wish to have them go. We are currently in a series of videos that deals with the state of American education. We've covered quite a lot of ground with respect to the shift from classical education models to more progressive models that are steeped in psychological conditioning programs. We've also examined the role of the Rockefeller Foundation and the formation of the General Education Board in the granting of funds that allowed for experimental psychologists like John Dewey and Edward Thorndike to develop their methods at Teachers College, Columbia. What we have seen in this exploration is the creation of a network of ideological and financial interests that converged in the early part of the 20th century to create a system where, through the use of psychological evaluation and manipulation, students, i.e. children, could be trained and programmed to fall in line with a specific worldview which suited a progressive, socialist, utopian ideal for our country. Ultimately, this was the goal of men like John Dewey. We discussed this in our earliest videos when we examined John Dewey. The addition of the Rockefeller fortune that aided in the furthering of the plans was crucial to the success of what would become a wholesale takeover of American minds through the school system. It took decades and has been a slow rollout of a process, but the fruits of the labor of the men who set these designs in motion can be seen clearly today in poor literacy rates, low test scores compared to other developed nations, and a degeneration in social and interpersonal relational skills among young people, resulting in rampant narcissism and generally bad thinking. In last week's video, we noted that an integral piece of the puzzle which formed the modern system was the increased spending and reliance on chemically oriented medical treatments. The convergence of experimental psychology with chemical medical interventions served to close the gap in teaching methodologies and lock children in a kind of prison where any behavior that is diagnosed as unfavorable may be treated with some kind of drug which may or may not provide the solution to the issue within the child. This is just one way that the furthering of and reliance on chemical medicine has created a multi-billion-dollar industry that exerts extreme control and a kind of full-spectrum dominance over our lives today. That is a subject which deserves much more discussion, but tonight we're going to take a look at the effects of the pushing of psychotherapeutic drugs in the school environment and how these interventions are really only designed to perpetuate the problems that they are advertised to fix. They do this by avoiding the root causes of childhood learning issues altogether. In the early 1960s, the first doses of the synthetic drug methylphenidate were administered to children in schools. Commercially sold under the name of Ritalin, this drug would be the first to be used to treat what would come to be known as attention deficit disorder, or ADD or ADHD. In the 1960s, a child might simply be diagnosed as maladjusted in order to be given this drug. Through the coming decades, this diagnosis would become more and more commonplace, really becoming quite widespread in the mid-1990s, followed by a serious rise into the 2000s. A Wall Street Journal report found that in 2013, roughly 1 in 5 boys at any American high school carried a diagnosis of ADHD. According to the CDC that year, 11% of all American children ages 4 through 17, that's over 6 million kids, had ADHD, indicating a 16% increase between 2007 and 2013. Another report from the Washington Post noted that the number of doctor's visits by children who were diagnosed with ADHD rose to 10.4 million in 2010, which indicated a 66% increase since the year 2000. This meteoric rise should cause concern, and it raises a number of questions. First, why has this disorder become so common among school children when in previous decades we did not see these kinds of issues present in children? To answer that, we need to ask, what are the symptoms of ADHD, and who decides which children are diagnosed with this disorder? Finally, with staggering numbers like these and the rise of cases throughout the decades where medical intervention has been employed to deal with ADHD, we need to seriously consider whether or not these medical interventions are actually treating the disorders, or if they're simply masking deeper problems that those in control of the system we've been examining would like to keep hidden. So, what are the symptoms of ADHD? A Time magazine story from 1994 stated that ADHD has 3 main hallmarks: extreme distractibility, an almost reckless impulsiveness, and in some but not all cases, a knee-jiggling, toe-tapping hyperactivity that makes sitting still all but impossible. Without hyperactivity, the disorder is called attention deficit disorder, or ADD. This vague and inexact syndrome leaves quite a lot of room for subjectivity in the diagnosis. What levels of each of these symptoms are considered extreme? Why would a child present these behaviors in the first place? And who decides that a child is actually diagnosable with this disorder? The same Time article states, in the absence of any biological test, diagnosing ADHD is a rather inexact proposition. In most cases, it is a teacher who initiates the process by informing parents that their child is daydreaming in class, failing to complete assignments, or driving everyone crazy with thoughtless behavior. Diagnosing those with ADD without hyperactivity can be trickier. Such kids are often described as daydreamers, space cases. They are not disruptive or antsy. One doctor in the report states that they sit in front of a book and for 45 minutes, nothing happens. So we see here that teachers are the ones who initiate this diagnosis of a medical disorder in children. Now, I think that this is a clear example of one way in which the classroom has been hijacked and transformed into an experimental laboratory where unqualified, ill-equipped individuals are meant to psychoanalyze children. When we look at what we've learned through examining Edward Thorndike and the behaviorists who sought to control students' minds through stimulus-response experiments, we should expect to see this kind of situation play out. Teachers are no longer there to teach children. Rather, they serve as proxies of the medical-industrial complex. This is what the designs of the likes of Dewey were always meant to achieve. In the book Crimes of the Educators, Dr. Samuel Blumenfeld, a brilliant teacher of phonetic reading skills, notes that it's very likely that these teachers have no idea of what they're doing. That it's more likely that their faulty teaching methods are to blame for any child's, quote, disruptive behavior, as they have been forced to learn in ways that actually cause confusion and frustration. The methods of teaching things like whole word reading and Common Core math require that children use the right side of their brain to do left brain functions, And this leads to dyslexia and may actually be why a child sits in front of a book for 45 minutes with no fruit being born from the time spent. Dr. Blumenfeld also notes that most teachers are told in their courses at college that roughly 30% of their students will not be able to learn to read, and that it will be part of their job to identify that 30% in order to get them the help that they need. Blumenfeld writes, incidentally, according to the Washington Post, the typical appointment for diagnosing ADHD takes all of 15 minutes. Everyone in the system works together. The teacher, the administrators, the school nurse, the pediatricians, the psychiatrists, and the drug companies. It's a diabolical machine designed to create a real mental disorder and enrich the pharmaceutical companies, all of which is a highly sophisticated form of child abuse. Throughout the decades of sophisticated study in the makeshift labs of public school and medical intervention, we should expect to see improvements in the level to which these afflictions and disorders occur, shouldn't we? When we have been given a cure to a problem, we should expect to see results that solve that problem. The fact of the matter is, just the opposite has occurred. We have continued to drug millions of school children, which has only served to zombify and sedate them while they absorb the ideological programming of values clarification and the infusion of postmodern ideas like social justice, intersectionality, and collectivist worldviews into core subjects like mathematics, reading, and logic. All the while, we've seen continuing declines in education in America, and rather than examine the environment honestly and do away with the interventions that are clearly not working, we continue to drug our kids, providing massive profits to the pharmaceutical industry, which allows them to continue their political influence through campaign financing and control of all major media sources. This is contributing directly to the horrendous and tragic events that we continue to see in the news. Children who have been exposed to psychotropic drugs from the earliest ages undergo permanent damage to their cognitive reasoning skills. In his book Medication Madness, Dr. Peter Breggin warns against the continued drugging of school children, stating that, "I was testifying before a committee of the Colorado State Legislature concerning why I thought the legislators should oppose the widespread drugging of school children. The legislature had a close-to-home example of both in Eric Harris, who was on Luvox at the time he slaughtered his classmates at Columbine and then committed suicide." The concept of medication spellbinding helps to explain medication-induced mayhem, murder, and suicide, and also why so many people take psychiatric drugs that are doing them more harm than good. Put simply, psychiatric drugs are proven to cause bizarre, unwanted, and dangerous mental states. Stimulants given to children often reduce all spontaneous behavior, and the antipsychotic drugs given to children and adults can utterly crush free will. Free will and rational choice-making require an intact brain, and psychiatric drugs, once and all, always cause brain dysfunction. That's how they work. This problem has become a personal one for me, as I can recall undergoing the psychological evaluations looking for an ADHD diagnosis around the age of 6. In the early 90s, they were rolling these drugs out to as many young boys as they could. In my opinion, and in hindsight, this was all in an effort to create a docile and controllable generation that was trained to rely on chemical interventions for any and all of life's challenges. Thankfully, my parents were against drugging their child, and I escaped that trap, but many of my friends did not. I saw firsthand the harmful effects of teaching children that drugs can solve their problems. I lost close friends to horrific overdoses and very often wonder what their lives may have been like if they had not been subjected to the kinds of interventions that were forced on them in their early developing years. What brilliant minds have been dulled and doomed to serve the machine of big pharma and social control? Will we continue to follow this path that has led to a rot within our society, or will we wake up and start to address the problems at their root causes? This system has been hijacked by people who want to control every aspect of your life, from the food you eat to the places you go, all the way down to the thoughts that you have. Will we continue to give up our free will choices? I pray that we do not. There is more to discuss here, and until next time, stay safe, stay vigilant, and stay diligent with your minds on guard.